Bonjour, Mathieu. All right, I think we have enough to get started. Absolutely. Okay. Welcome, everyone. This is our Planning Committee meeting for Monday, December 6th. We have no regrets today, although Councillor Brockington has let me know he's running a little bit late. Eric, can we do a roll call just to confirm that we have quorum this morning, please?
Councillor Dudas.
I'm here.
Councillor Tierney. Councillor Leeper.
Good morning.
Councillor Brockington. Councillor Menard.
Morning.
Councillor Coetzee.
Présent.
Councillor Kitts.
Here.
Councillor Hubley. Chair Moffat. Chair Gower.
Here.
You have quorum, Chair.
Thank you, Eric. We acknowledge that Ottawa is located on unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, whose culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. Il est important de souligner que la ville d'Ottawa se trouve sur un territoire non cédé de la nation algonquine Anishinaabe, dont la culture et la présence sont enrichies et continuent d'enrichir ces terres. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 3, 4, 5, and 6 on today's agenda. For the items just mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal if council does not adopt an amendment within 90 days of receipt of the application for a zoning bylaw amendment. To submit written comments on these amendments prior to their consideration by City Council on December 8, 2021 for item 3 or January 26 for item 4, 5, and 6, please email or call the committee or council coordinator. We have some interesting items on the agenda today, but we have something special before we get into the meat of our meeting. Today is the last planning committee before Leanne Snedden retires. So I think Leanne is with us. There she is. Good morning, Leanne. It's nice to see you. I just have some words I wanted to share on the occasion of Leanne's retirement from the City of Ottawa. On behalf of my colleagues on the Planning Committee, I want to thank you, Leanne. Leanne is retiring as Director of Planning Services after more than 34 years of dedicated service to both the city and the residents of Ottawa. I'm grateful for this opportunity to look back on some of her many contributions over the years. All over Ottawa, you can see projects Leanne has helped steward. She began her career working for the former city of Nepean when she was 21 years old as a full-time lifeguard and swimming instructor, and eventually she would become the portfolio manager at the Nepean Sportsplex. After 17 years with Parks and Recreation, she took a series of roles with Public Works, Transit, the environment, and community sustainability. In 2012, she joined the planning department as the manager of policy development and urban design. She was essential in developing the city's official plan amendment 150 and managed the implementation of 6 transit-oriented development plans and 9 community development plans. She helped bring smart growth and sensible urban renewal to Ottawa with the Infill 1 and Infill 2 policies. Building on her experience working on planning policy, Leanne shifted to planning services, and that's where most of us involved with Planning Committee have worked with her in recent years. During her leadership as director, this committee has had to deal with its share of controversial and sometimes difficult files. I want to take a minute to give you a sense of the scale of development applications that Leanne has worked on or overseen. Under her watch, there have been 109 official plan amendment applications, 331 plans of subdivision, nearly 1,500 site plans, and 802 zoning amendments. And some highlights among those projects and policies: Building Better, Smarter Suburbs, the Riverside South Community Design Plan, the Tomlinson Building, the Ottawa Hospital, and the Amazon facility in Barrhaven, which resulted in $30 million in development charges collected for the city. As a member and now co-chair of the Planning Committee, I've seen firsthand how dedicated Leanne is to her staff. Working with them and councillors and residents, she has continued to deliver solutions to problems big and small. And behind the scenes, Leanne has also worked hard to improve many internal processes and has looked consistently for innovative ways to deliver services. These are things that the public doesn't always get to see, but they're important, and they've resulted in a better experience for everyone involved in development applications. Her work with the Land Management System project promises to modernize service delivery in the coming years. And through her role with the Development Directors of Ontario Committee, she's been able to share our city's best practices with other municipalities. Leanne, your wealth of knowledge and experience will be greatly missed as you embark on the next chapter of your life. And I'm honored to have this opportunity to recognize your many years of service and contributions to our city. Your dedication to the public is evident in all that you've achieved, and your work will continue to guide and impact the planners and staff that have been fortunate enough to work for you and with you. Thank you, Leanne, for your service to the city, and we wish you the very best in the next steps of your life. Congratulations.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Do you want to say a few words, Leanne, or?
Sure. I just certainly thank you, Chair, for your leadership, and to the rest of the committee members. Many of you I've worked with, and some are new faces, so I wish you all the best on this committee. It's certainly one of the most challenging committees, as I'm sure you're probably coming to recognize, and just want to thank you for the support that you have for our team and planning services in our department. And I just want to thank you for all the opportunities that we've had to come and our team to speak about developments that are taking place in Ottawa in the past years that I've been here. And I'm really excited about passing that torch on to the next generation. And I know you're in very good hands. And thank you very much for all of your guidance and support over the years. Thank you.
There's a lot of your colleagues tuned into Zoom and watching on YouTube today. Steve Willis would like to say a couple words. Steve?
Thanks, Chair. First of all, Leanne, congratulations on your retirement. It's a really big day in anyone's life, and I know after many years of service with the city, it's a bittersweet moment probably to you have a great adventure to look forward to, but you are leaving behind some really close friends and acquaintances you've made over the years. Speaking of friends and acquaintances, he was going to try to be on the call. The city manager, Mr. Kanalakis, was supposed to be on the call, and he has asked me to speak on the senior leadership team's behalf. And I believe Mr. Chenier was also going to be on the call as well, because he was your GM for many years as well through your career. So on behalf of the entire senior leadership team, I had just a few quick words, as well as the departmental management team, and your colleagues from the departmental management team are on as well. Chair, in many ways, as a general manager's job is easier when a director really does just deal with issues and keeps issues from flowing up to my level. And, when issues come to a director on the whole, it's because people are frustrated and have been unable to resolve issues through staff and other levels of management. So a director's job is never easy. It's always the most complicated issues day in, day out. And Leanne was very adept at problem solving. And in her skills in problem solving are well appreciated within the organization and in the community at large. So give Leanne a lot of credit for just solving problems and trying to bring people together to find solutions all the time. But Leanne's greatest legacy will actually be the team she's leaving behind, because Leanne, more than most people I know, was incredibly devoted to developing people. She believed very strongly in her team. She was a strong and passionate advocate for her team at all times. She'd hold me to account for that in many instances for the development of her team. And she really showed the leadership qualities of ensuring that we are developing the planners coming through the system, and cared very deeply for them. So our management team congratulates you on your next adventure. We're a little envious in many ways that you're going into the next part of your life, but we wish you all the very best, and thank you and your team for the entire department. We're all applauding you and thanking you for what you did. So thanks very much, Leanne.
Thanks very much, Steve. Really appreciate that.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Leanne. Congratulations. Okay, we have 6 items on the agenda today. So we're going to go through the agenda. We have speakers for some of them, presentations for some of them, and we can hold any for which councillors may have questions for as well. First, we'll confirm the minutes from November 25th, 2021. Are the minutes confirmed?
Confirmed.
Confirmed.
Thank you. The first item is the 2020 Annual Development Report. We do have a staff presentation on that, so we'll hold that one. And the second item is the 15-minute Neighborhoods Baseline Report. Again, we have a staff presentation on that, so we'll hold that item. The third item is a zoning bylaw amendment for outdoor commercial patios. There's one delegation registered, and we have a staff presentation, so we'll hold that item. Item number 4 is a zoning bylaw amendment for 299, 291 Carling Avenue in Capital Ward. There are delegations. I also saw something about possibility for a deferral motion. Eric, do you have confirmation on that? Is there a need to defer this?
I don't have details on that yet, Chair.
Okay, well, we'll hold this anyways and come back to that later. Number 5 is a zoning bylaw amendment for 200 Baraboo Street, Rito, Vanier, and there are delegations registered, so we'll hold this item as well. And the 6th item is a zoning bylaw amendment for 471 Terry Fox Drive in Canada North. This is to add an additional permitted use. There's no delegations registered for this one. Are there any questions from councillors or any need to hold this one? Okay, so on the zoning bylaw amendment for 471 Terry Fox Drive, are the report recommendations carried?
Carried.
Carried, thank you. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning of the agenda, back to the first item, the 2020 Annual Development Report, and we have a presentation from staff on this one. Good morning, Natalie.
Good morning. I'll wait until the slides are up. Perfect. Well, good morning, chairs and councillors. I'll be giving a brief overview of the 2020 Annual Development Report. Next slide. The ADR monitors a range of demographic, housing, and economic variables, including several key aspects of the official plan. 2020 data show important trends that support the growth management policies of the OP. This presentation covers population and projections tracking, housing starts, intensification rate, employment, and index of commercial services around transit stations. Next slide. The City of Ottawa's population estimate and the population projections in the official plan were close with a difference of 2.9%. Next slide. Housing continues to increase. Housing starts were up 30.7% in 2020 compared to 2019. The City of Ottawa has a good mix of unit types, with apartment units leading the way. Single detached units decreased to 26.4% share from 31.3% in 2019. Building permits are a more accurate measure of the total housing activity in the city, and building permits in 2020 were also led by apartments and followed by townhouse units. Next slide. In 2020, a 57.3 intensification share was achieved. The 4-year average intensification share was 52%, higher than the OP target of 40% for the 5-year period from 2017 to 2022. The recently adopted OP states that for growth management purposes, the intensification rate should be calculated to align with the growth projections. This requires shifting the measurement from a calendar year to a mid-year basis and to include only private dwellings in the built-up area. With this revised method, a 58% intensification rate was achieved from mid-2019 to mid-2020. Since mid-2018, an intensification rate of 53% was achieved. Next slide. Employed residents in the City of Ottawa decreased 5.3%, and the unemployment rate increased 2.7% to sit at 7.4%. This is not surprising, with COVID-19 impacting employment. In 2020, the knowledge sector had the largest number of employed residents in the City of Ottawa. Next slide. For the fifth time this year, the index of commercial services around transit stations was included in the ADR. This is a measurement of commercial services that are within walking distance of transit stations. The average score of stations analyzed was 64.8, which means that some errands can be accomplished within transit station area. And next slide. Overall, in 2020, we saw population tracking close to OP projections, a decrease of employed residents, and an increase in the unemployment rate, an increase in housing starts with a balance of unit types, that some errands can be accomplished within transit station areas, and overall the OP is succeeding in its growth management approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Are there any questions from councillors for staff? Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thank you to staff for the presentation on this. The document is really interesting, the appending document, and then the 15-minute communities piece, really interesting stuff for our future and just what we've been seeing during the pandemic, but also our projections on a number of items. So I did want to dig into some of them. The piece around the intensification target obviously is what is most, I guess, surprising. We've gone far beyond what the goals of the old OP were and the goals of the new OP. And it's not just on the 1 year total, it's a 4-year average. And we're achieving much, much higher than we said we would in the first 4 years of this OP. I think we're actually looking at more like 2031 type numbers, 2020, closer to 2040 numbers of what our intensification goal was. I mean, I think we're at 60% at the end of 2045, and we were almost there last year. So just on that vein, I'll have questions around that, Chair. In the report, we see single detached starts decreasing, and the proportion of semi-detached staying relatively stable, and the proportion of apartments way up compared to years previous. So kind of what we're looking for in some ways in terms of efficiency in the city. But I guess on the whole, to staff, based on the intensification targets we're seeing, what are the implications for the new official plan based on what we've already approved?
So, Chair, I might take a first shot, and Natalie and Royce may wish to add to this. So first of all, we're really encouraged to see the patterns that we saw in this report. Those patterns are cyclical, however, and we need more data over more time to see that it's a sustained long-term trend. We do see if you look in the last 15 years of high-rise development, for example, we'll have lean years and boom years, and we've gone through a boom year for sure. The other development patterns are more consistent over trend, and Royce and Natalie may be able to do it. We're actually a little surprised that the single family wasn't as high as it was, and we're still trying to understand why it wasn't, because the demand is certainly there. You can see it with the lineups at the sales centers. So in terms of the new official plan, if we over accomplish our intensification target, it means that what has been identified as 25-year land supply may end up being a 30-year land supply, and future councils will not need to take action to meet the PPS requirements if that's the case. And that's assuming population patterns happen the way our OP anticipates, and it also sees that the trend line continues. Again, encouraging data, too early to see it as long-term trend. Royce or Natalie, I don't know if you would like to add to what I said.
Yeah, Chair, if I could add to that. So with how we looked at intensification in the current annual development report, it only looks at the number of units within the built-up area. It doesn't look at what type of units they actually are. So just a couple of comments on the intensification rate. We did change it to align with the new official plan from mid-2019 to mid-2020. And what it does is it captures the first 6 months of 2019, which, if you recall, 2019 was also a very was a banner year, what we called it back in the 2019 annual development report. And those bulks of apartments were captured as part of this prior to COVID. So it's also a 1 year snapshot. I agree with Mr. Willis. It's 1 year does not a trend make. In terms of the the implications on the growth management and the new official plan. We also have to be cognizant of the demographic profile and the housing choices of that demographic profile, particularly of the growth component, which is what the planning department sees is different from what we've seen in the past couple of decades. There's going to be an increase of the demographic that will be looking for larger units, and not necessarily what apartments can supply in today's sort of how we do deal with condominiums. So that going forward, and as part of the new official plan monitoring, we want to look at the intensification rate, but also the proportion of large dwelling units, because that's really sort of key to seeing how much of that demand for large dwellings can we actually satisfy within the built-up area, and thereby relieving some of that demand out in the greenfield area. So we have to wait and see, and we have to also look at the next how the new official plan monitoring report would see that. And again, we have to look at this over a number of years rather than just 1 or 2 year period.
Thanks for that. I do note that, yeah, definitely that 1 year kind of snapshot doesn't a trend make, certainly, but we are seeing back to 2018 even some pretty good trends, far above our predictions for the first 5 years on the new definition of intensification that's being used in the OP. I believe we're at 53% rate of intensification achieved since mid 2018, as the report talks about. I think that's using the new definition. And the 4 year snapshot, even using the old definition, still fairly high, much higher than what we were predicting. So I guess, are you able to compare the housing starts that we said would happen in the OP, the new OP, versus what we saw in this report? Just, in terms of apartments, single family, row housing, semi. What is that trend showing? You kind of touched on it, but if you could just expand on that a bit more.
So, chairs, the annual development report does not compare the starts within the past year with the first couple of years of that 25, 28 year growth need in the official plan. So the growth management strategy in the official plan is actually quite coarse. It looks at the total new dwellings that we anticipate, and we proportion it by 5 year periods as best as we can. But it doesn't mean that the market's always going to follow those trends. So we haven't done a year by year comparison. The new official plan, the growth management strategy, doesn't really intend to allocate units on a year by year basis. It is more of a total, here is the demand for new dwellings over a 28 year period. That would be the growth management 2018 to 2046. And then compare it to our existing stock. And if there's more demand than we have stock, how can we accommodate that? So there isn't a year by year comparison with the growth management strategy. That's not really the purpose of the growth management strategy, is for a year by year, line by line review. It's too coarse for that type of analysis. Okay.
I do remember in the new OP seeing the number of single families we were expecting, and that over the length of the time and how those type of units that we would need. It would be interesting to start comparing that every few years of what we're actually getting, I think, and just see if we're meeting that mark or not. I guess a couple other arguments came out of here that we see with the building industry making at committee, and one of them was flight from the municipality to other municipalities. It doesn't seem that is occurring in any large way with the numbers I'm seeing here. Doesn't seem that that's a trend at all. And the other point I'll just make is we often hear about the need for supply to lower prices, but we had a lot of supply, a lot of concentration. You saw those red dots in the report, big centered dots around Norcor. And the effect on our price of housing, obviously, it's difficult to pin that down just from supply. There's a demand side here as well, and a whole bunch of other factors. So I wonder if staff can just comment on those couple of things: is the flight from the municipality and affordability of housing.
I'll take a first shot, Chair, and then Royce can add to it. So The surrounding municipalities are seeing some uptick in terms of housing sales in their areas, and we are finding a lot of family households that are been priced out of the Ottawa market seeking those areas, and they're also attracting a lot of retirees who wish to sell their Ottawa properties and to take some of their capital out, and so they've seen growth. And you can go to Carleton Place and Campville and other areas, and you will see that there are new subdivisions going up quite rapidly when they hadn't been for many years. So that is happening, but it's statistically, as Royce's data shows, is not that large in the context of the broader region, where both Ottawa and the Ville de Gatineau really still contain the majority of the population for the broader region. Some people are leaving the city, but many others are choosing to stay within one or the other. The housing cost issue is extraordinarily complex, and I don't think there's a single cause to what's going on right now. And certainly the province, who has the overall responsibility, is struggling to find that. The Premier's called a housing summit because of this. Some of it has to do with supply issues in various areas of the province. We've passed a new official plan, so that's our answer to that supply question. Some of it has to do with mortgage policies the federal government sets, and mortgage insurance policies, lending rates, and also sort of demographic shifts and trends. And then immigration rates will also play, not so much right now in the middle of the pandemic, but if you look in the longer trend, that has a lot to do with housing supply will play out. So we really can't sit here and say, on a one-year snapshot of data, what's the cause of this really extraordinary increase in housing prices? But it's not just in Ottawa. If it was just in Ottawa, we'd say it's an Ottawa problem, but it's across all of Canada, and in fact, even beyond Canada. So it's just too complex, and I just don't think staff can give committee a reasonable answer on the root cause.
That's fair. And I think that's why I think the argument's just about supply, and only putting more supply is never really going to get to our affordability targets or actual affordable housing, subsidized housing that we need in there. We need to be building that. Supply is not going to do it on its own. So, Chair, I have one more question, but I don't recall if it's this report or the 15-minute report. It's about the transit station walkability. Was that the ADR or is that the 15-minute?
There is that's included in this report, Councillor.
Okay.
So go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I saw the number of 64.8 was the average index, which is a fairly low walkability score for transit station hubs. That's the average. The highest, obviously, at Rito and Parliament, and the lowest index was a Tremblay station at 29. So it was, though, a bit surprising about how low the walkability was with several stations around LRT. I suspect some of that will change over time, given our building necessity. But it does beg the question about the build of our transit line and what we're doing in the future for transit station build out. I mean, the imperative to put this where people are already is quite important. And I think there's a number of stations where there's a long walk to basic services. So I just wonder how staff, I know this is kind of a transit question, but it's in the report. So I just wonder if staff can comment on that and how we see the future in terms of the build of where we put our transit stations and connectivity to walkable services.
So, Chair, again, I'll start, and I think Ms. Chi was on the call, or if Mr. McEwen's on the call, he can add to what I have to say. Transit stations, some of them, because by necessity, are in areas where there isn't a lot of development around, and we look at something like the current Montreal Road station. I know Councillor Dudas has been very focused on changing this dynamic. The current Montreal Road station, where it's located, it's just not a walkable environment, but it has every opportunity because of a couple strategic parcels to change. So and the same thing with Lincoln Field Station and a few other ones, that because of federal land ownership or other sorts of things, there isn't a lot going on in and around those locations. So what we have in the report is a snapshot of what we have today. In the new Stage 2 program, there are a lot of improvements to walkability. So Councillor Brockington, for example, in the Stage 2 approval, got a number of sidewalk improvements to stations in his ward. When those facilities are actually built, those walkability scores will improve as we see Stage 2 in completion going forward. But it's something definitely we're going to be looking at in the new TMP as well, about how to augment that as well, because it is a path to accomplishing our OP goals.
thanks so much for that. Thanks, Chair.
Chairs,
Thanks,
if I could
Councillor.
also
Yes, go ahead, Royce.
I just want to clarify that we're using in terms of walkability. The score is actually not a score of how walkable it is to transit stations. It's called a walk score, but what it measures is how many commercial services there are in proximity within the walking distance. So it's more of a measure of commercial services within an area. And if we look at the map of where the transit stations are, as Mr. Willis says, it makes sense that some areas are rich in commercial services and other areas that are more up and coming are currently do not have as much relative, but over time, we would expect those areas to have more commercial services.
I wanted to follow up on that if I can, because the walk score near transit stations has actually gone down over the past couple of years. It was about 10 points higher 2 years ago in 2018. Is that due to COVID, or are there other factors? Has there been any analysis on why those scores have gone down and changed to go lower over the past couple of years?
Yeah, so walk score is done by a company, and if Ms. Paulsine, she reached out to them to find out, what was going on, and Natalie, if you would want to share with the committee our findings on that.
Perfect. Yeah, so I had reached out to Walk Score because of that drop in scores from the previous 2 years. And some of it was a result in a change in the way Walk Score was looking at scores. So they were removing something like a driving school. It was before categorized as an elementary school by mistake. So little changes like that from 2018, as well as some closures, either permanently or temporary, of those commercial services due to COVID-19 impacted the scores in 2020.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cloutier.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Menard, for your comments. And I have no question, but I just, with respect to Tremblay Station, adjacent to the VIA station, the developments that VIA has proposed are for their station, and the overpass that I've spoken with Mr. Willis about, and that is funded in EA from Tremblay Station to the train yards, a major commercial development, are all elements that, while they're not very walkable now, they will be in the future, and that's what we're building for. So I appreciate that Councillor Menard highlighted the current situation, but it is progressing to a more fulsome walkable situation. So I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions for staff? I would like to thank staff for their work in putting this together. It's a really important report, really required reading for anyone who's interested in how our city is growing and changing. So thank you, staff, for putting this together. And I always look forward to this one each year. Is this report received?
Received.
Received.
Thank you. Okay. I guess closely related to what we've been talking about is the next item on the agenda, the 15-minute neighborhoods baseline report. And Natalie has an overview of that for us.
So chairs, if while that presentation is queuing up, if I could just take a minute to have some introduction to the 15-minute neighborhood report. This was an important concept for the new official plan. And at the start of the new official plan, a few policy and public health planners approached us in research and forecasting to develop a way to see how our current neighborhoods are doing. And what we did is we looked at what other municipalities were doing, but ultimately we put together a Made in Ottawa approach, and that's a report before you today. And to share some common elements with those other studies, but also some other methods that are unique to Ottawa. The principal authors of the report are Natalie Paulsine in research and forecasting and David Maloney in community planning. We also worked heavily with Inga Rosendahl and Ottawa Public Health. And I think this report is another successful collaboration between planning and Ottawa Public Health. We also worked with Dr. Michael Sawada from the Department of Geography at the University of Ottawa and Katie Carr from the Ottawa Neighborhood Study. And we wish to thank them for allowing us to use their data as the basis for some of our analysis. And finally, I just want to say that I'm really proud of what the authors and what the team have accomplished in this report. It is a heavy report, particularly since there were a few other things going on at the same time, such as writing a brand new official plan. So thank you for giving us the time to highlight our 15-minute neighborhood baseline report.
Great. Thank you, Royce, for that introduction, and thank you, chairs and councillors. I'll give you what is hopefully a brief but fulsome overview of our 15-minute neighborhood baseline report. Next slide. The new official plan integrates 15-minute neighborhoods as a fundamental building block for how the city grows. The 15-minute neighborhood concept informs many of our OP policies. There are policies that support the evolution of 15-minute neighborhoods throughout the OP, whether it be mobility, housing, urban design policies, or parks and green spaces. Reflecting on the pandemic, we see that 15-minute neighborhoods improve our resiliency and well-being. Next slide. The 15-minute neighborhoods baseline report is the first step to look at 15-minute neighborhoods. And it does this through two lenses. The land use planning lens, which we call services and amenities, and it's those daily and weekly needs. And the second lens is the transportation network and experience, which we call the pedestrian experience. And this looks at the environment of a particular street or sidewalk. It's important to note that there are many stakeholders with different roles when it comes to 15-minute neighborhoods. Next slide. This study does not define locked-in boundaries or declare where there are existing 15-minute neighborhoods, nor does this study assume everyone can walk everywhere all the time. Instead, the study hopes to highlight a range of 15-minute neighborhoods and shows the complexity of 15-minute neighborhoods. This study is a baseline of accessibility of services and amenities and the pedestrian environment today. The study looks at how we can increase pedestrian travel opportunities, and with the baseline, it looks at how and where we can improve our neighborhoods and who can help achieve those improvements. Overall, it's a strategic document and tool that is fluid as 15-minute neighborhoods evolve. Next slide. This baseline study has a few components. They are a public survey, scores and mapping that show a range of accessibility to services and amenities, scores and mapping that show a pedestrian environment, and the study includes a gap analysis. And overall, the goal of the study is to create a baseline and identify through a gap analysis what we need to improve our environments as they evolve. Next slide. As mentioned, our study included a public survey. This survey ran for approximately 6 weeks, and we had just over 4,000 respondents. Questions assess what people prioritize within a neighborhood, what is missing, how they get around, and factors and elements that affect their safety and enjoyment of walking. We use postal code data to link respondents to the new OP transects to allow us to analyze survey responses by transect as seen in the report. We also included options in the survey for demographic data to allow analysis based on gender, age, those with or without children in the home, and those who use mobility aids. Next slide. The survey was on the new OP webpage and was circulated through a number of ways, including the City of Ottawa's social media, Twitter and Facebook pages. It was sent to the Ambassadors Working Group for the new OP, which consisted of 30 diverse groups. It was sent to councillors who included on their websites and newsletters. And during the survey period, we also ran a Q&A page on the new OP webpage, which allowed residents to ask questions on the 15-minute neighborhood concept before filling out the survey if they wished. Next slide. In the survey, we asked respondents to prioritize a list of services and amenities that they find to be important within a 15-minute walk from their home. From highest priority to lowest priority, according to the survey responses, we have grocery stores and supermarkets, parks with or without playgrounds and splash pads, retail and commercial, OC Transpo bus stops, health services, LRT or O train stations, indoor community centers, rec facilities and libraries, elementary or secondary schools, and finally, childcare facilities. You will see all of this is integrated into our analysis and mapping. Next slide. In the survey, we also asked respondents to prioritize a list of factors for safe and enjoyable walking in order to complete the second lens of our analysis on the pedestrian environment. From highest priority to lowest priority, according to the survey, we have well-kept and reliably maintained streets and sidewalks, intersections that feel safe, protection from traffic, safe environments, shorter distances between destinations, shade and other protection from the weather, comfortable places to sit and interact, a variety of shops that face a commercial street, arts and spaces for kids to play, and finally wayfinding. Again, you'll see all of this is integrated into our analysis of the pedestrian environment. Next slide. We also ran a supplementary rural survey to specifically understand the perspective of rural residents. The question assessed what service amenities are prioritized within easy access to their homes, where they go most often to get those services, whether it's in the urban area or their closest village, what services and amenities are missing at their closest village, how often they visit a village, and factors and elements of their safe and enjoyable walking. The rural survey results underscore the need for more services and amenities in our villages and highlighted the important role of village main streets in the social lives of rural residents. Next slide. I'll now explain the mapping we undertook that used responses from our public survey. The mapping exercise was completed to create the baseline of access to services and amenities. Before we get into the actual maps, I want to share with you the approach we undertook. First, we started with just the locations of our 9 services and amenities, so those that were addressed in the survey. Map 2 is scoring residential parcels on the access to those services and amenities within a 15-minute walk, with all services and amenities scoring equally. Map 3 is adjusting that score based on weighting from the survey priority list of service amenities. Map 4 is adjusting that score once again based on a concentration of services and amenities within a 15-minute walk. And Map 5 is simplified scoring of access to service amenities in order for the map to be easier to understand. And this map will be easier to see, especially during this online presentation. Next slide. So as mentioned, the first step in the mapping exercise was to bring in each location of the service amenities from our survey into the map. We did this using our 2016 employment survey, city-owned data for amenities such as park locations, and data from the Ottawa neighborhood study. As a reminder, the list of service amenities is in the top left-hand corner. Where there are darker dots, that indicates a higher concentration of service amenities. Next slide. Our next step was to bring in all residential parcels and create a 15-minute walking network around each residential parcel that is inside the urban boundary and in our villages. Each residential parcel was then giving a score out of 9 for each service and amenity category that was within a 15-minute walk. This map determines the presence of each amenity type within a 15-minute walk, not how many of each amenity type was within a 15-minute walk. So for example, you got 1 point if a grocery store was within a 15-minute walk, 1 point if a school or multiple schools within a 15-minute walk, etc. As you can see from the legend, the purple color indicates a highest score with red indicating a lower score. Next slide. So we know that different services and amenities have a higher priority score than others according to the public survey we ran. Therefore, we used responses from the public survey to apply a weight to those services and amenities. You can see the weighting of each service and amenity type in the graph in the top left-hand corner. Next slide. So this map builds off of the 2 previous maps, but factors in the count of each amenity type that can be accessed relative to the total number of each amenity in the city. So it now takes into consideration if there's more than 1 of those amenities within a 15-minute walk. For example, a residential parcel that has 3 schools within a 15-minute walk would score higher than a residential parcel that has just 1 school within a 15-minute walk. We still have the 9 levels of scoring, and we know this map is difficult to digest, so we bundled the scores into 3 categories. Next slide. So our 7, 8, and 9 scores are now bundled into high access, so purple, 4, 5, and 6 scores to moderate access, the yellow or the gold, and the 1, 2, and 3 scores have low access, which is red. This map creates our baseline of access to service amenities for residents within the urban boundary and within our villages. And it shows us that the 3 areas of the city, our urban, suburban, and villages in our rural area, have different levels of scoring with higher access in the urban area, near the town centers in the suburbs, and village cores in some of our villages. Next slide. I'll now give a brief overview of our pedestrian environment analysis. The main goal of our mapping work with respect to the pedestrian environment was to quantify the key aspects of safe and enjoyable streets for people. To do this, we considered artificial intelligence, built form in the public realm character of streets, and GIS analysis that inputs many layers of city data. Next slide. For AI, we partnered with the Ottawa Neighborhood Study and Professor Michael Sawada at the University of Ottawa. AI was machine learning that ranked 50,000 Google Street View images on their perceived walkability. This AI was a good starting point for our team. However, we realized that we also needed to apply a planning lens to our assessment, and this was completed through a street character and built form assessment. Next slide. This assessment categorized street segments containing commercial services into 4 categories. Here's our urban category where you can see shops facing the street, no visible parking lots, street trees, and high lot coverage. Urban form is the most hospitable for pedestrians. Next slide. We then have what we categorized hybrid urban. In these segments, you will find sidewalks and crosswalks, shops facing the street, street trees, but you also find vehicle-oriented uses and interrupted street wall. I just want to note here that tree canopy wasn't a factor for our service amenities, but it is considered in our pedestrian environment analysis. Next slide. After hybrid urban, we have hybrid suburban, where characteristics are more dominated by the suburban built form. Here you will find surface parking, more lanes of traffic, but some storefronts facing the street. Next slide. The final category is a suburban category. The character of streets in this category are less safe and enjoyable for pedestrians, as they are generally more designed at a scale that supports convenient car circulation. These streets have multiple lanes of traffic, inward-facing streets with surface parking lots, low lot coverage, and overall are more car-dominated. Next slide. I just want to note on this slide that there are examples of the urban street segments in the suburban transect. So that is our built form and public realm character. Our next slide. So the AI and the character assessment gives us our pedestrian environment. However, our character assessment was just on segments of commercial streets. So our next step was developing a safety and enjoyment formula using city data that best represented the character assessment and could be combined with the AI scores. So scores could be calculated on arterial, collectors, and commercial street segments. The city data also need to take in consideration that factors were important to our survey responses for safe and enjoyable walking. Next slide. So GIS data that was used included tree canopy, presence of buildings framing the street, surface parking, traffic volume and speeds, number of vehicle lanes, and nearby natural features, along with other data. Using this data, we then ran a formula that verified a correlation between city data and the character assessment. This allowed us to assess all commercial and collector and arterial streets. Next slide. So with all of this, here we have our pedestrian environment assessment. Next slide. And here we have our scores of access to service amenities and our scores of the pedestrian environment. This is our baseline of 15-minute neighborhoods. Next slide. So again, here's our baseline scores. As you now know, it's a complex system with multiple factors. This also means that there are multiple stakeholders, both public or the city sector and the private sector. Next slide. The project's aim is to improve our neighborhood scores. In the study, a gap analysis was completed to identify improvements. Improvements are at a semi-high level. They're more specific than the OP, and there's direction to help detail at the program level. In the gap analysis, next steps on actions are identified, and who can help move improvements forward are also identified. The who are mostly city roles. Next slide. The OP has limited influence for specific businesses. OP language is generally broader or high level and provides a range of permitted uses, but not specifics. Overall, the OP sets the framework towards 15-minute neighborhoods, but we must work with our city plans and programs to achieve 15-minute neighborhoods. Next slide. These other plans and programs can be specific and are limited or scoped to city facilities and infrastructure, such as the Parks and Recreation Facilities Master Plan. The time horizon can vary, but overall it's about improving convenience for service amenities and increasing options for walking to the service amenities. Next slide. Because there's a link to other city plans and programs, we met with a number of internal stakeholders. These groups have a role to play in improving our pedestrian environment and our service provisions in equity-seeking neighborhoods. Next slide. We received some valuable feedback for our improvements. This feedback helped identify how we can improve our access to service amenities and how we can improve our pedestrian environment and who can help us make those improvements. Next slide. After we completed our study, we looked at lessons learned and what we can look at to see how we can improve our methods if we undertake the study again in the future. That can be from survey methods, data sources, and partnerships. Next slide. For our baseline study, we learned that there is a range and complexity of 15-minute neighborhoods. It's about increasing walking options while recognizing the need for other modes as well. The study established a baseline to build up. This is the first step of many. The report is a strategic document and tool that is fluid as 15-minute neighborhoods evolve. 15-minute neighborhoods can be seen as a unification of OP master plan policies and other city plans and programs. And overall, the study identified where and how we can improve and who can help us make those improvements. Thanks.
Thank you for the overview and for the report. Really interesting methodology that you've used to put together the scores. Are there any questions from councillors? Councillor Fleury?
Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for the detailed presentation as well. I have a couple of questions. One, which is like the usage of the map. So when you look at the map, it's really interesting. You can move in and out, but they're not like pinned tabs, like say on a Google map. And I wonder if that is available, or if the intent is for more of a macro analysis. Because to me, that's where I kind of looked at. I tried to narrow into areas of my community and tried to understand the pins and stuff. And I just wanted to know if that was, a bit like Geo Ottawa, like you could cross tabs and see what's what. I wonder if that tool is available to us.
Chair, before Royce answers, I just want to emphasize to council, this is brand new work that we've done as a department, and I think Ottawa is one of the first in all of Canada to do anything like this at all. So part of this first report is to try to get the methodology down to tell the story, and I'm really quite impressed with the work the team did. And I think in time, as a monitoring tool, we'll be able to add more complexity to the way the information is portrayed. And I think the council makes an interesting suggestion. I'll ask Royce to answer whether it's feasible in future iterations of this to kind of migrate to that. But I want committee to understand how big a deal it was to even get this first version in place, because I said that we've invented this methodology, and just from the public reaction to it, we think people really, really appreciate this and want us to continue with this work.
Thank you. I'll take this one. So through you, Chair, we will be looking at putting our scores up on Geo Ottawa to allow internal and external stakeholders to take a look at that local level. We are also looking at the opportunities to partnership again with the Ottawa Neighborhood Study to see if they can have our scores uploaded onto their website to allow some further analysis at their levels of geography.
Great. Yeah, I'm interested because I think it is a lot of work went into this, and the more it can be consumable, the more it can be looked at and further analysis. I don't have much of, so I guess I have two further points. One, which is a 15-minute neighborhood is a series of policies and objectives and contexts that set out an environment that we're trying to establish, but it's easily removable. So I'll give you a very recent example. Both Councillor King and I, over the last week, there's been local rumors that the Metro on Beechwood, which is a bit of a heritage building and use in our community, was going to be removed. So if I look at your map, a grocery store on Beechwood would have tagged it. It is. I did the homework previously. So I guess I question when we identify benefits to the neighborhood, in particular to the 15-minute context, what policy environment supports that those uses? I gave in this case a grocery store, and we don't see many grocery stores leave communities generally. But what are the further policy contexts that allows us to protect or retain or cherish those uses that contribute to the 15-minute neighborhood particularly?
So, Chair, first and foremost, we understand the role that major uses such as grocery stores play in the neighborhoods. And I think Ottawa's zoning, for the most part, is among the more permissive in Ontario to locate them in many different neighborhoods. And that was work done several years ago to expand the opportunities for smaller scale grocery stores in many neighborhoods. we don't control the levers of whether a big corporation decides whether one opens or closes. That's outside the scope of our power, but our zoning does create a permissive environment to get those types of uses coming in. And at some point it is a market consideration.
Fair point. I guess my further point to that, because we do live within the authorities that we hold, and we don't have all of them as you've described, but in the spirit of achieving 15-minute neighborhoods, as things are added, generally they will be, but there are instances where they are removed. How do we keep that in mind when we consider what are missing amenities within a neighborhood, or when we would consider, say, additional heights or permitted uses to try to incentivize those types of investments? I'm not giving you the fear of Beechwood, because we seem to be past that over the last week, but I'm using it as an example because I think it's a tangible one to consider in the 15-minute environment. So, Chairs, I mean, it's certainly a valid point that some things that we count as part of the score may disappear over time. As I said, as we get into the finer grained community level planning, either through a secondary plan or whether there's a major site for redevelopment within those areas, we can look at those gaps and speak to the development proponents to see whether or not they're interested in bringing some of those amenity forward and make sure that the zoning that's put in to those sites as they redevelopment allows that. I know, for example, we have a food desert in parts of Somerset Ward, and Councillor McKenney, for example, I've been in the room when they have asked people coming forward with development applications if they would look at a grocery store as a potential amenity in there. And I think that's part of where we work as a team to try to encourage these. We can't force things to happen because our regulatory role doesn't put us in the business of creating these businesses, but we certainly can enable them everywhere we can. So as we get into community level design plan updates, such as secondary plans or big sites, as I said, we'll be looking at this tool because it's a brand new tool to use. Okay. My final one is it's specific on one map. So a few months ago, we completed the Parks and Rec master plan work, and there had been a number of motions, there had been additional context, even going as far as an appendix of current known programming gaps. If you look back at Kevin Weary's report, I believe Linda Tremblay, for example, added Appendix A, which was super important to the report. And I guess in the spirit of that one map, which is accent to community amenities, specifically recreation amenities, I think we're falling back in the old trap of that first publication, where we can't compare 1950s pools to 2020 pools, right? So I would just caution us on that particular map, because the amenity ranges within that map is treated as equal when the age of the infrastructure limits its programming and often its footprint. So it's more of a comment, and it's specific to one map, but it's just we had done so much work with the recreation master plan and the amendments there that I wonder if that one could get a further review in the spirit of what was amended at the time.
Is that a question, Councillor Fleury, or just a general comment, or we looking?
I mean, it's a general comment, but I would like to see if that map can be amended to reflect the final approved plan for the recreation master plan, which had a little more nuance in the facility types and limits. The work is done already, Mr. Chair, in the rec master plan. It's just embedding it in this particular map.
Sure, we'll take that comment offline and talk to Parks RCFS staff about it.
Thank you, and thanks for this. This is very helpful to set the beyond the policy. It really gets into what's there in each community. So
thanks, Councillor Fleury. Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Councillor Gower, for letting me speak here. Not really on this committee, but I was blown away by this presentation. I think this is absolutely fabulous. When I think about the groups in Canada, they're always interested in the data. And when they talk about, well, what is 15-minute neighborhood? What do they really mean by that? When they see this data, they will be so thrilled. The Ottawa Neighborhood Study was the first one that people, gravitated towards and found incredibly helpful. And this one will be unbelievable. And one of your comments in your presentation, Natalie, was just that most of the roles in terms of looking at this will be city roles. And I think that's very true at the very beginning. But I think when groups, I know in Canada, when the community associations and the Canada North Transportation Committee start looking at this, they will also, I think, be very helpful, and to all the community associations out there. But at first, for sure, as Councillor Brockington will say, Caldwell, we constantly talk about is a food desert. It's a food desert. People don't really know what that means. And now to have this data to look at it and say, what does that really mean? That there is nowhere that people can go for groceries. You know, the quickie is the option. That's not a grocery store, really. I think I understand this is just the beginning, and I can't believe how wonderful a beginning it is. So I just say thank you very much on behalf of a lot of people who will be thrilled to see this.
Thank you, Councillor Crate. Councillor Dudas.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I'll be very quick, but I'm ecstatic to see this work, and I think a lot of members in our community feel the same way. I did have two questions though, and maybe this will come through time. But one of the things that we are talking about is in the incorporation of employment opportunities in 15-minute accessible communities. And while I know that that's a nebulous concept because we all work in different places, and retail could be our place of employment or an office space, but I'm looking at examples such as the health hub up on Mer Bleue. And that recently, with the passing of the East Urban Design Community Plan, there was spaces allocated in that vicinity to accommodate for future complementary employment. So I'm just wondering, in terms of these 15-minute communities, whether they're new communities or established communities, how will staff look to incorporate varieties of employment into these communities so that instead of always building communities that assume we're going to commute downtown, we can look to communities where we can live and work and play and be where we are within a very short distance?
So chairs, on that, there's a couple of ways to look at how we would plan for 15-minute neighborhoods. So if we look within the built up areas, the idea is really about how can we increase daily and weekly services and amenities and how to get to them. And it doesn't necessarily consider major employment destinations as part of that. But that doesn't mean that we are ignoring that, for example. So if we look at the employment landscape of Ottawa, it's actually very centric with our federal services at campuses and our post-secondary institutions and our hospitals and so on and so forth. And so it's 15-minute neighborhoods doesn't necessarily cover that aspect of employment. That doesn't mean that as a department, as a profession, we are not trying to get those employment opportunities in. Certainly, a 15-minute neighborhood does not preclude employment opportunities where they exist. And if there's an employment opportunity, if there's an already existing major employer and they can provide complementary services that would benefit the neighborhood, then that certainly fits in within that ideal. The other lens would be for newer communities when we're building from scratch almost. And then again, we want to still have the employment types, recognizing that there are still some market considerations we have to look at within Ottawa. We cannot have federal campuses within every single secondary plan, as an example. But we do have major employment. We still want to locate them when they make sense. But the 15-minute neighborhoods can include those areas, but also areas outside of those employment nodes. And so when we plan for them, we want to make sure we have enough land for those major employment loads, and they could have complementary services for the neighborhoods adjacent to them. But outside of those 15-minute walks from those major employment blocks, we still want to have services to the residential areas outside of, beyond the 15-minute walk to those employment blocks.
I'm sorry, Councillor.
Maybe I can just jump in and provide maybe an idea. And Steve, then I'll let you fly with it. One of the things that we've certainly learned through the pandemic is that people are more than capable of working from home, and that they might be interested in more of the hub and mobility spaces. So for instance,
Chairs, if I could just conclude the councillors along the lines of our own thinking. So one thing the pandemic is showing us that workers are more mobile than they've ever been. And in all likelihood, in the post-pandemic world, people will have more than one work location. compared to in the past where they would go to one spot. Now there's certain workers, if you work in a hospital, it's not like your work is going to go to a different location. But for those who are in office type uses, they are likely to have more than one. And we think 15-minute uses will make areas attractive naturally because they have a lot of the amenities that people would actually want as complementary when they choose to not work at home, especially, and they will be good for hubs. So we think that there is a bit of a surrogate. The difficult time to do this type of planning right now because it's hard to measure how much change the world is going to go through and how quickly. But early in the next term of council, we will be bringing a refreshed economic development strategy to FEDCO, assuming governance stays the way it is today. And we will be looking at that issue of job distribution as one of the layers in the new economic development strategy in the next term. We were going to bring it this term of council, but with the pandemic, we put tools down on it, and all economic development staff are focused on economic recovery as opposed to those initiatives which we had previously reported to council.
That sounds very exciting to me, honestly, to hear that